Alright guys, so here's our fourth lesson in the Earth and Climate unit. We're going to be talking about the greenhouse effect. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the greenhouse effect, and then we're going to focus a little bit more on the chemistry behind it and the chemicals involved. We'll be jumping around a little bit in your textbook, so if you want to follow along, we're in chapters 8.6 and 9.4. But most of these graphs, the first few graphs you'll see actually are not from your textbook. So here's a kind of depiction of the greenhouse effect. You should be familiar with the left half of this picture, as it is very similar to one that we showed either the last lesson or the one before that. Talking about how thermal energy from the sun is either reflected back into space or it's absorbed on Earth. And when it's absorbed on Earth, it's absorbed by greenhouse gases. At least when it's absorbed in the atmosphere, I should say. There is a natural greenhouse effect that goes on. There's a natural kind of energy trapping process. The gases in our atmosphere absorb IR radiation, and then it radiates some back into our planet and helps keep us warm, and it sends some out into space. And there's a very fine balance in that natural process to help heat our atmosphere and heat the Earth's surface so that it's at a livable temperature. The issue is, though, that sometimes we can throw the balance of these chemicals or the balance of these gases out of whack. So if we produce an overabundance of a particular greenhouse gas, it's going to increase the concentration, and then it's going to throw the greenhouse effect out of balance. And when that happens, when there's a human influenced or human caused event, we call that an anthropogenic effect. So we're going to talk a little bit about the anthropogenic greenhouse effect. So this diagram is kind of showing you where the human involvement has come into place. If you look at kind of the left 3/4 of the graph, that's just your natural greenhouse effect. And if you look at the right kind of quarter of the graph, we're showing you what the increased greenhouse effect is causing our planet to do. So if we add greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, we are going to reabsorb a lot of the energy that was supposed to be sent out into space, and then of course some of that's going to be re-radiated as heat back into Earth. So I hope that you can see why that might be a little bit of an issue. A lot of the ways that we are contributing to this anthropogenic greenhouse effect revolve around the technologies that we're using. So the cars that you drive, for the most part, are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. The industrialization, particularly in Western countries, and then the deforestation that can occur are all ways that humans have added or contributed to the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Particularly for deforestation, as an example, when we cut down trees, not only does cutting down those trees release carbon dioxide, but those trees themselves are supposed to take out carbon dioxide as they breathe. So if they go away, there's going to be less trees to take out the carbon dioxide from the air. We call this an anthropogenic greenhouse effect, or for lack of a better term, an enhanced greenhouse effect, because we are enhancing the natural greenhouse effect produced by the gases present in our atmosphere. We are, as humans, amplifying it. So this next picture is what we call a Keeling curve. You should see that the blue line is kind of giving you an average of the carbon dioxide concentration at any given point in time over the past kind of 40, 50 years or so. And the red line is showing you the actual carbon dioxide concentration at a particular point in time. So the question that you should ask yourself is, why is that red line going up and down, up and down? The answer is that there is kind of an annual cycle to the greenhouse effect, or the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And if you look at the inset graph in the bottom right corner, it shows you that as we move from January to April, May, the concentration of carbon dioxide increases, and as we move down into October, it decreases and then starts to climb kind of back up again. this data was taken in Hawaii, so it's a little bit south from us. So if you were to take this data in Ottawa, it would look a little bit different. In terms of the annual cycle shift, might be just a tad different. But the reason for this difference is that in the summer months, when plants get a lot of exposure to sunlight, the process of photosynthesis is increased. And so as plants undergo more photosynthesis, the amount of carbon dioxide that they need increases, meaning that the amount of carbon dioxide available in the atmosphere decreases. As they undergo less photosynthesis, which happens in the winter months, as the sun is further away, they use less carbon dioxide, and then there's more carbon dioxide available in the atmosphere, which is obviously not a good thing for us. There is a very strong correlation between the concentration of carbon dioxide and surface temperatures, not just on our planet, but even on our neighboring planets. So if you look at Mars, for example, which does not have a lot of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere, Mars is a very cold planet. Venus, on the other extreme, is a relatively hot planet because there is a lot of carbon dioxide present in its atmosphere. So there is a strong correlation between surface temperatures and then carbon dioxide concentrations. This next graph is kind of going back a couple 100,000 years. And it's showing you that while it looks kind of messy, it's still a fairly consistent pattern in terms of carbon dioxide concentration. That pattern, though, breaks down as we get about 1,000 years away, well, even more so, about 200, 150 to 200 years from today. If you look at the graph that's inset at the top there, it shows you that since the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of CO2 in our atmosphere has spiked incredibly, actually. It looks like it's about, doubled from just a couple thousand years beforehand. If we look down here, we're at about 200. This is a couple thousand years ago, and if we're up here, we're actually about closer to 400 today. This is a little bit of an old graph. So the question is, why is this a problem? Why do we care that, for example, CO2 is increasing compared to other greenhouse gases, let's say? Because there are other ones. But the reason why carbon dioxide is such an issue is because of how permanent it is in our atmosphere. As we'll talk about, I think, on the next slide, carbon dioxide can be sustained in our atmosphere for 100 to 1,000 years. The other question that a lot of climate skeptics may have is, well, how do we know the carbon dioxide levels 1,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 400,000 years ago? Because it's pointless to compare data for today if we don't know what the patterns were. And that's a very good question, right? How do we know that this just isn't our planet cycling through a natural process? Well, we know that because we can take a look at how much carbon dioxide was trapped in ice cores, because ice cores will trap carbon dioxide, and these ice layers that we find at the poles will just pile on top of each other, and they've been doing so for the last couple 100,000 years. So if we drill a hole deep into the ice and we pull out an ice core, you can take a look and you will actually be able to see carbon dioxide trapped in that ice core, and you can see the concentrations increase or decrease as we get closer to the top of the ice core. And that tells you, kind of gives you like the same way that rings on a tree tell you how old it is, right? So we can go back years, we can pinpoint ice ages, and we can figure out how much carbon dioxide was present at a given point in time. So that is a reliable way to go back and say, well, we know that we had X amount of parts per million of carbon dioxide 1,000, 100,000, 500,000 years ago. And we can see that the data today is, without question, not part of Earth's natural cycle. So carbon dioxide is a relatively famous gas now. It's produced naturally by decomposing plant life and animal life, as well through animal respiration. So we know that all animals exhale carbon dioxide. It's produced by humans, more specifically through vehicles, factories, clear cutting of trees, and these are kind of the problem areas. It's trapped on Earth by what we call carbon sinks. So oceans and forests, trap carbon dioxide and produce solid calcium carbonate or carbon deposits. And then forests obviously trap carbon dioxide because they need them to breathe. So big, large forests are good for us. As we said before, it's got a lifetime of 100 to 1,000 years, which isn't great. Next up will be methane, CH4. It's present in much smaller quantities than carbon dioxide. However, it's much more potent in that it can absorb 23 times as much thermal energy. Produced similarly to carbon dioxide, plant decomposition, and then animal digestion. There are some bacteria, for example, that produce methane as a byproduct. Human processes, so coal mining and natural gas extraction, release CH4 into the atmosphere. The only bright side here is that it doesn't have a long lifetime in the atmosphere. It's only about 12 years. However, the amount of CH4 in the atmosphere has more than doubled since the Industrial Revolution. N2O, or nitrous oxide, again not very common but very powerful, can absorb about 300 times as much thermal energy as CO2. Again, produced naturally by some bacterial reactions, and its main source from humans is through fertilizers. Nitrogen-based fertilizers give off a lot of N2O. Another set of common gases is what we're going to call chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. They're made up of chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. There's no natural sources, but unnaturally it comes from leaking air conditioners or refrigerators. The concentration was almost none prior to the Industrial Revolution. It's gone up now, but it's now declining again because manufacturers are working to, and manufacturers and governments are working to help decrease this. Two types are CFC11 and CFC12. They've got lifespans of 45 and 100 years, respectively, so relatively long. Some of the greenhouse gases that aren't talked about as much are water vapor and ozone. Water vapor, these are both naturally occurring. There's not a whole lot of man-made, negatively man-made water vapor and ozone. The issue with water vapor, though, is that it undergoes what we call a positive feedback loop. So as the temperature on Earth rises, the amount of water vapor increases, which causes the temperature on Earth to rise, which causes the amount of water vapor to rise. And that's just a circle, a loop going around. And when we say positive feedback loop, we don't actually mean a good thing. We mean that it's increasing the concentration of something. So in this case, it's increasing the concentration of water. What you should have noticed as you took a look at all those greenhouse gases is that they have one thing in common. Well, they got some things in common, but one of the main ones is that they're made up of 3 or more molecules, and then, or sorry, 3 or more atoms. So these molecules have the ability to undergo different rotational patterns, meaning, and because of that, they can absorb this infrared light. So if we take a look at nitrogen and oxygen, which are 2 of the most abundant gases in our atmosphere, they are not greenhouse gases because they are linear molecules that are only made up of 2 atoms. And because of that, they won't absorb any infrared radiation. Water, CO2, and methane, while CO2 is a linear molecule, it's made up of 3 atoms and can undergo a whole bunch load of different rotations and vibrations. Because of that, or because of the fact that it can absorb infrared radiation, it's got these bonds, and it will absorb this energy, and it has all these mechanisms to kind of release it. So that's the biggest similarity in terms of the way these molecules look. Essentially, if it's made up of kind of 3 or more atoms and it's present in our atmosphere, you can bet that it's going to be a greenhouse gas. So that's it for this lesson. I hope you're able to fill out your notes. As always, feel free to take a look at this video again, or you can ask me some questions when we see each other in class.